Move on now to our next speaker, and that is Engblom from the ILO, who is the Chief Technical Officer of the advisor to the Triangle in ASEAN program. She's based in Bangkok, but she's had 15 years experience working in Asia and Africa on different programs within the ILO on issues of migration governance, human trafficking, child labor, education, skills training, and livelihood. Anna, to you, let me start with this. We've all been talking about regular pathways and things and opening up and things like that. And you're sitting in a region and working on a project, and particularly in the region that is very flowery with its words. The ASEAN calls itself a caring and sharing community, yeah, by its constitution or whatever its vision is. But at the same time, we know that in this sub-region of ASEAN, there is a lot of debate going on even now whether the number of irregular migrants is higher, if not equal to regular migrants. Kind of thing. So is there any hope for ASEAN if this is the number and this is the situation? Then you talk about regular pathways. How is that even? What are the beginnings of it, and how are you yourself within the ASEAN, in the Triangle project and within the ASEAN vision as it's implementing it? How do you see this happening, given that there are this huge number of irregular flows that ASEAN refuses to, and it has refused to accept it? ASEAN framework on labor migration, for the longest part after its adoption in 2007, just refused to look at irregular migration, until today refuses to really look at it in big ways. So how can that really look at Objective 5, which is a keystone objective of the GCM? Anna, over to you.
Right. Thank you, William, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you, and thanks for these hard-hitting and really quite challenging questions. I'll do my best to try to respond to them. First, though, let me start with a brief overview of migration in ASEAN for those that are not so familiar with this region. So basically, the population of the 10 ASEAN member states have become increasingly mobile over the past 30 years or so. And there are currently some 20 million migrants originating from ASEAN countries globally. These are UNDESA statistics. Almost half of those, of 48%, are women. So ASEAN is also hosting more than 9.7, close to 10 million migrants, whereof around 7 million are intra-ASEAN migrants. So those that are not from within the region are mostly coming from South Asia, but also from other countries in the world. Just to put this in the statistics in perspective, the number of intra-ASEAN migrants have almost tripled from 1990 to today, and projections are indicating that migration will continue to increase year by year in the region. So of the 10 ASEAN member states, 4, Brunei, Malaysia, Thailand, and Singapore, are considered destination countries. And in each of these countries, migrants make up a significant part of labor force, ranging from between 7.5% to 10% of the labor force in Thailand, up to 35% in Singapore. And to no surprise, most migrant workers in ASEAN are employed in low-skilled, low-paid, labor-intensive jobs in the typical sectors: agriculture, fisheries, domestic work, manufacturing, construction, hospitality, and other types of services. In ASEAN, these migrants, the low-skilled migrants, work almost exclusively on temporary employment contracts and are admitted for specific periods, be it 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years, which can be extended. But after that, they are, of course, expected to return home to their countries of origin. Often the right to stay in the destination country is linked to an employment contract with the specific employers. And with a few exceptions, they have to return home if the contract is terminated early. even if it's not because of the migrant workers. There are some exceptions, of course, in ASEAN, where migrants can apply for permanent residency and even citizenship. For example, in the case of Singapore, but this only applies to those with higher education, a professional skill set, and or an ability to make a significant financial investment into the local economy. So for the vast majority of workers, there is no way to stay on in the destination country for a longer period of time. But to answer your question, or at least one of those questions that you posted, William, yes, I do believe that the ASEAN vision is in line with Objective 5. And I do see a political will and an ambition to ensure pathways for regular migration. Definitely availability. I think we can discuss whether these are flexible or not, but definitely regular migration is what is preferred within the ASEAN region. And as you were saying, what is more or less the only thing that ASEAN member states wants to accept. Similar to what Stella was mentioning earlier, an important part of the ASEAN community vision is a globally integrated and competitive single market based on a number of core elements. And one of those is to allow a freer flow of skilled labor migration. And ASEAN leaders' commitment to promote regular migration is also demonstrated in the 2007 ASEAN Declaration on the Protection of the Rights of Migrant Workers and the 2017 Consensus on the Protection of Migrant Workers. Various aspects of operationalization of the declaration is discussed every year in the yearly ASEAN Forum on Migrant Labor, AFML, which is a forum that opens for consultation, not only between government, but also invites workers, employers, and CSOs to participate in negotiations of recommendations. Of course, maybe no surprise this year, the focus of the AFML discussion will be on how to ensure protection of migrant workers under COVID and future health pandemics. So what are then the regular pathways or mechanisms for regular labor migration that has been established in ASEAN? Well, the most common approach to govern labor migration is through bilateral agreements or MOUs. This is done in Thailand and Malaysia. Thailand has MOUs with its 3 neighboring countries, Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia. And Vietnam, actually, there's a 4th MOU. And that is the only way to, well, there is also a border employment scheme, but these 2 channels, the MOU and the border employment channel, is the only way to enter Thailand regularly if you're in the lower skill segment of work. Singapore and Brunei organizes admission through national laws. I'd also like to mention that for professional and higher skilled workers, at the regional level, all ASEAN member states have agreed on a framework for mutual recognition agreements where 8 high-skilled professions have been identified and where theoretically free mobility within ASEAN should be possible. I think the MRAs have been in place now, I'm not exactly sure, but maybe for around 10 years or so. And for various reasons, the number of people migrating under the MRAs have been very, very low. I think we're talking about less than 100 or in that range. You were asking about irregular migration. Yes, it's definitely there. Whether it is equal to the number of regular migrants, I don't want to speculate about. Personally, I don't believe so. If we look at all the countries, Singapore has a very strict regime, so the number of irregular migrants in Singapore should be relatively low. Brunei, maybe likewise. Thailand has a history of a large influx of irregular migrants. And that is because the MOU mechanisms is seen as very complicated, lengthy, very expensive compared to just walking across the border from Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, PDR. And there are others that enter through the MOU system but becomes that loses their official status, sometimes even without realizing it. So in Thailand, I think an interesting, there's some numbers that are quite interesting, is that in currently there are around 2.8 million registered migrant workers in Thailand, and of those only 970,000 entered through the MOU system, and another 50,000 through the border employment scheme. But the rest, 1.8 million, were working in Thailand irregularly, but have been regularized through one of the, well, through the latest amnesty that came, that was announced in 2017, 2018. So in Thailand, definitely we have at least had a large number of migrants. Now with the regularization process, it's probably less. But anyway, it's a big problem for Thailand. There has been a number of positive developments in ASEAN to ensure pathways for regular migration. We see improvements in legal protection framework with a lot of recent developments in Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia, etc. Also positive news is that social protection has been extended to migrant workers in Thailand and Malaysia, at least certain groups of migrant workers. And we also see movements towards fairer recruitment and recognition of the principle of zero recruitment costs and fees for migrants, although this is far from a reality yet. But a lot still needs to be done, clearly, before we can say that we have reached or materialized Objective 5. So let me end with a few recommendations. First of all, I think we need to review the MOU mechanisms and other channels for regular migration to see how they can be simplified, made less expensive and time consuming. Otherwise, there is no way we can reduce irregular migration. I think the COVID situation will make this more difficult, at least in the short term, as there are additional requirements which will make migration more costly, regular migration more costly, including the need to pay for quarantine and COVID tests, etc. And there's a lot of discussion in ASEAN right now who is supposed to pay for those. Of course, the ILO position is quite clear that such costs should not be covered by the workers. But anyway, that's a discussion that is ongoing. The MRA system also needs to be reviewed and simplified to actually put it into place. It is a good practice, I think, in theory, that could show the path for lower skilled sector as well. There is a need to provide information about emerging demands for skills and occupations so that governments and migrants can make more informed choices about labor mobility and where they want to go and what the situation of migration will look like in the future and what opportunities there will be within the region. Something that is important, I don't know if it has been mentioned by the previous speakers, but we do have in the ASEAN member states, some countries have bans on migration into certain occupations or countries, typically women migrating for domestic work. And these bans should be removed as they just forces women to migrate irregularly. And there are, in many cases, few other employment opportunities available. Also, and this has been mentioned by Manahida, Stella, Oscar, I think everyone before me, but the GCM calls for allowing family unification and a lot still needs to be done in this area in ASEAN. This is granted professionals normally, but hardly, if ever, extended to low-skilled and seasonal workers in the region. So I'd like to end there. And thank you, and over to you, William.
Thank you, and thank you for the recommendations, which brings me back to the words of Javed. Basically, your recommendations sound like a reset of the ASEAN program in terms of, review the MOUs, review the MRAs, give more information, family reunification. I think these are so important. It's so important. These are the right things that we need to be doing, kind of thing. And as I was listening to you, I was thinking of Stella in how she was talking about the changes in Africa, kind of thing, and I find that fascinating. And I'm wondering if we should have these kind of interregional discussions to see what we could learn, because ASEAN has started a long time ago. I mean, the ASEAN program started a long time ago, but it's moving ever so slowly. And I hope it doesn't get sick because of COVID and moves even more slower, kind of thing. But let's hope that COVID would be that moment, that opportunity where it kind of picks up the pace, kind of thing, and there's an urgency about getting things right, getting things on, getting things moving. But